audience participation for this next part. I would like you guys to just, I'm going to ask a question and I want to hear some answers from the audience. So my question is, what do these three things, these three people, have in common? I'll give you a little context if you don't know. The one on the top left, this is Genghis Khan, ruler of the Mongol Empire. This is a 17th century preacher, and these are the Normans. So does anyone have any guesses? Please give anything, just shout out. Or
We're all invaders.
they're all invaders. Well, the 17th century preacher, maybe not so much.
The people represent them.
Maybe. Here, I'll give you a hint. They all have something to do with my presentation. Particularly.
They're all dead?
They're all dead. Well, that's correct, but that's not really what I was going for.
Are they all crusaders of some kind?
No, not really. Okay, I'll tell you. So, the Genghis Khan, his empire was the main reason why paper made its way to the Western world. As you can see right now, my note cards are on paper. The 17th century preacher presented his sermons in 3 points so that to emulate the Trinity. And now my presentation also has 3 points following that tradition. And the Normans, the French-speaking Normans invading Germanic-speaking Britannia, mingled the two languages, French and Germanic, and created English, which I'm presenting to you now. So as you can see, our lives are hugely influenced by people of the past. If these 3 different people hadn't done the things they had done, me staying up here would not be possible. But this school has the same principle. This school has the same types of history. There are people in its past that have done things to make this school possible. And I'm going to talk about 2 particular men, Theodore Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot. Both were avid conservationists, and both had an ethic of use over preservation. So, in case you didn't know what an ethic is, an ethic as defined by the Webster Dictionary is a theory or a system of moral values, a way to live your life, basically. And so these men lived their lives by the conservation ethic. Theodore Roosevelt, well, there's a lot to talk about. He was obviously President of the United States, that's how we all know him, and we know him as a Rough Rider too. But we don't really know as much about his naturalist side. You see, from a very young age, he was extremely interested in the outdoors and nature. And even though he was slightly sick and wasn't the most robust child, he just had this go-getter attitude that he would go out there and keep looking, keep searching for samples, for specimens. When he moved to college, he founded the Boone and Crockett Club, which was a club that was a hunting-centered club, but with a conservation tint. They wanted to make sure that hunting grounds and those animals that were hunted were going to be protected, not poached, not killed, slaughtered for needless reasons. They saw it as unsportsmanlike. And then that club participated in a protest to protect Yellowstone, which at the time railroads and mines were trying to move in. And they saw this as a natural place that needed, a natural wonder that needed to be kept alive. Theodore Roosevelt was actually deeply influenced by the next man in our slideshow, Gifford Pinchot, who was also a conservationist, which I think is somewhat ironic. And then just to let you know that he wasn't an only preservationist, he wanted to use nature. After his presidency, he went on a hunting trip in which he hunted and killed 512 animals. Now, that sounds like maybe a big waste, but you see, he was one that advocated use of nature. He could go out and do something in nature, just as long as it wasn't wasteful. He figured that nature was here for us to use to our advantage. Next, his ethic. We need to talk about what this all means. So he believed in use over preservation. He didn't want to just keep a forest pristine just because it was a forest. It needed to stay pristine because the future generations might want to use it. He believed that the former practices of the United States would bring the nation to its knees, and because of that, he founded 51 federal bird reserves, 4 game preserves, 150 national forests, 5 national parks, and 18 national monuments. literally hundreds upon thousands of acres of just wild space as a future resource bin, basically, for the United States. So now the next man was also extremely influential in the conservationist movement, Gifford Pinchot. Now Gifford Pinchot had a little bit of a different beginning. His family was actually the people that were wasting the resources, and they had a radical turnaround. Gifford Pinchot's father was a lumber king, and they had built a fortune off of wasteful practices. And at the end of his life, his father said basically that he didn't want his son to do the same thing. So he encouraged Gifford Pinchot to go into a college for forestry and to emphasize that as his major. And Gifford Pinchot became so good at this that in 1898 he was appointed as head forester by Theodore Roosevelt, his admirer. And really we can see his ethic really shown in the Hetch Hetchy Valley conflict. The Hetch Hetchy Valley was a valley near Chicago that they wanted to build a dam on. And the preservationists, the ones that wanted to keep it pristine, just for the sake of keeping it pristine, did not want this to be dammed up, but Chicago needed a water source, especially after the Chicago fire. And conservationist Gifford Pinchot and eventually Theodore Roosevelt agreed and built the dam against the wishes of preservationists. So what was his ethic? So his ethic, again, was also against preservation. He wanted to use forests and other resources scientifically. If you were going to chop down a tree in the forest, you need to do it so that there wouldn't be erosion that would flood into waterways and pollute waterways with... He wanted to make sure that you could cut down trees and still keep the forest alive. And he was quoted to have saying to Congress about the Hetch Hetchy Dam, "Now the fundamental principle of the whole conservation policy is that we are to take every part of the land and its resources and to put it to that use in which it will serve the most people." So as you can see, he had an ethic that was far from just keeping nature as it is. So now the question is this ethic even relevant today? I mean, am I just up here talking about some random guys in the past that their ideas are long gone? Well, here is Joe Schmo. He is the average American, and how does this all apply to him? Well, you see, we're going to say that Joe Schmo's conservation is still alive in him. He is actually a fairly avid recycler. He's interested. He uses internet over paper. He carpools all the time, and he uses everything to the fullest. These principles still make sense today because they all save money, they all save resources, and we can do them now without doing drastic changes in our lives. So, is it still viable? Is the conservation idea still viable? Well, yes. It saves us money. It creates a future for our children. And so I'd ask you, do you want to be like those future people at the beginning of the slideshow? Would you like to be able to say that you have influenced the people that influenced the future? That people could look back on you and say, we would not be here today without those that were in the past. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions for Danny?
I have a question. You talked about using the internet over paper. How does that save money?
If you have to print paper, you have to use ink and paper. For instance, I'm putting this in the context of a student, if I'm going to turn in an assignment and I have to print off my 3-4 page paper, I'm not only having to buy that paper, but I'm also having to buy that ink. Now, if I use the internet and put it in a Dropbox, as Mr. Johnson is so fond of setting up, I haven't done anything. It's all imaginary. It's virtual. It's all pixels flying around somewhere. So I'm not having as large of an economic impact. I don't have to pay out of pocket.
Without putting you on the spot,
Yeah.
do you know of any national forests or parks reserves here in Minnesota that were set aside by Roosevelt?
I am not 100% sure about that one. I just knew that there was a general number and there was hundreds of thousands of acres. So basically, it's hard to throw a stone without hitting one, so I wouldn't put it out there as impossible.
Probably there.
Yes.
What do you do personally in your own life as far as conservation,
Well,
besides the internet?
yeah. For me personally, I use everything I own to the fullest. I don't. I hate to throw something away that can still have a use, and I'd like to recycle, give things to other people that still have a use. If I have a game or a movie that I'm not using anymore, but I have a friend that really enjoys it, I'm going to give it to him so that he can, first of all, save money, not have to buy a new one, and second of all, not use resources to get a new one, rather than, just throwing it in the trash and saying, I'm done with this.